She walked onto that base with one bag, no announcement, and a secret that would bring the entire command structure to its knees. They saw a quiet black woman in a mid-level uniform and made their first mistake. They assumed she was nobody. Colonel Hayes dismissed her. Soldiers mocked her. And when they finally dragged her in front of the whole base to finish what they started, every phone was out, every eye was watching, waiting for her to break. What none of them knew was that the woman they had spent 11 days hunting was the one who had been hunting them all along. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The desert had a way of stripping things down to their bones. No trees to soften the horizon. No clouds to break the flat, white sky. Just heat rising off the pavement in slow, lazy waves, and the distant hum of generators keeping the base alive. Fort Caldwell sat low against the Nevada landscape like something the earth had tried to swallow but gave up on halfway through. Guard towers, chain-link fences topped with razor wire, buildings the color of old sand. And beyond all of it, nothing for miles. The convoy rolled through the main gate just after 1400 hours. 3 vehicles. No flags. No escort markings. The kind of arrival that didn't want to be noticed. Specialist Darnell Webb was on gate duty when the lead vehicle slowed to a stop. He checked the ID that came through the window, ran it against the clearance log on a screen, and waved them through without much thought. Transfer orders came through Fort Caldwell all the time. Personnel moving between assignments, temporary details, support staff. Nothing unusual about it on paper. What made him look twice was the woman who stepped out of the second vehicle. She was compact, composed, and she moved like someone who had already decided what she thought about this place and filed it away. No dress uniform. No rank display beyond a single mid-level command insignia. Dark tactical wear, clean but not pressed. She carried one bag. Just one. She didn't scan the base the way most new arrivals did, that wide-eyed sweep of trying to orient yourself. Instead, she looked at things carefully, deliberately, the way you look at something you're not seeing for the first time. She didn't announce herself to anyone. She simply walked toward the command building, and behind her, the convoy doors closed. "Who is she?" Webb muttered. Corporal Tasha Fields was standing 2 feet away, watching the same thing. "No idea," she said. "Transfer paperwork just says operations support." Webb squinted against the sun. Operations support doesn't usually arrive like that. Fields shrugged and went back to her post. But she kept glancing over her shoulder for the next 20 minutes. Inside the command building, the air was stale and cold from the climate control running too hard. Colonel Victor Hayes stood at the head of a long table with 3 officers around it when the door opened and Aaliyah Brooks walked in. Hayes was a man who had learned to perform authority so naturally that most people forgot it was a performance. He was tall, silver-haired, with a jaw that had been set hard for so long it seemed like it might crack if he ever genuinely smiled. He looked at the woman who entered his briefing room the way he looked at most things that arrived unexpected, with a measured, careful contempt. Major Brenda Simmons, his administrative officer, stepped forward. "Colonel, this is Commander Brooks. Temporary operations transfer from Central Command. She'll be working out of the coordination office for the foreseeable future." Hayes extended his hand. Not warmly. The kind of handshake that means, "I see you, you're below me, and we both understand that." "Commander," he said. "Colonel." Aaliyah shook his hand once and released it. Her voice was even, unhurried. Hayes turned back to the table without offering her a seat. "Simmons will get you oriented. We're in a tight ship here. Integration happens on our timeline." "Understood," Aaliyah said. She took a seat anyway, at the far end of the table, just outside the cluster of officers. She set her bag down quietly. She folded her hands. Nobody introduced her to the room. Nobody tried. The afternoon briefing was already in progress when Private First Class Logan Pierce showed up 10 minutes late, dropped into a chair with the kind of casual disregard that came from never having been seriously corrected, and loudly whispered something to the soldier beside him that made both of them smirk. Commander Brooks was going over supply rotation schedules, a dry topic, and she made no effort to perform enthusiasm about it. She was simply moving through the material with quiet efficiency when Pierce leaned back in his chair and raised his hand. "So, with all due respect, ma'am," he started, and the way he said ma'am made it clear no respect was being offered at all. "Where exactly does this come from? Because we've had protocols in place for supply rotation for 2 years. I'm not sure why we'd shift the cycle based on a recommendation from someone who's been here less than 3 hours." A few people around the room stiffened. Not because they disagreed with Pierce, some of them probably did agree, but because there was a way you said things in a briefing room, and Pierce had just kicked that door off its hinges. Aaliyah looked at him for a moment. She didn't look offended. She didn't look flustered. She looked like she was waiting for him to finish, the way a teacher waits for a student who has asked a question they can't quite answer yet. "That's a reasonable concern," she said. "The current rotation cycle creates a 72-hour window where 3 of your 6 fuel depots are simultaneously at low capacity. If there's an unscheduled operation during that window, you're looking at resupply delays across the board. The adjustment closes the window to under 18 hours. Pierce blinked. "If you'd like to walk through the data after the briefing," she added, "I'm happy to do that." He didn't respond. He uncrossed his arms slowly and looked at the table. Someone coughed. The briefing moved on. Afterward, standing in the hallway, Sergeant Malik Carter watched Pierce leave without saying another word. Malik was a compact man with careful eyes and the kind of stillness that people either trusted immediately or didn't understand at all. He had been on base 18 months. He had seen a lot of transfers come through. Something about this one felt different, and he hadn't yet figured out what to do with that. By 1900 hours, the mess hall was at half capacity. Long tables, fluorescent lights, the smell of institutional food that somehow tasted better than it had any right to. Aaliyah was sitting alone at the end of a table near the far wall. She ate without reading anything, without looking at a phone, without doing the thing that people did when they wanted to look occupied. She just ate, and she watched the room. At a table about 15 feet away, a group of soldiers were talking loud enough for her to hear, without making it obvious they wanted her to. 2 tours in the desert, and now they send us a transfer from a coordination office, one of them said. What she even qualified for? Who knows? Probably knows somebody. Yeah, probably. Laughter. Not cruel exactly, but careless. The kind of laughter that doesn't think about who it lands on. Aaliyah kept eating. She didn't look at them, but her eyes moved, just slightly, to the table, then to the door, then to the guard station visible through the window behind it, then back to her food. Malik was 3 tables away. He had been watching her since she sat down. Not staring, just checking. He saw what the group didn't notice she was doing. She was cataloging the exits, the sight lines, the way the room organized itself socially, who sat with whom, who avoided whom, who talked across rank lines, and who stayed rigid within them. She wasn't just eating dinner. He picked up his tray and moved to a table slightly closer. Not next to her, just closer. She didn't acknowledge it, but she noticed. The restricted file request happened at 2100. Aaliyah submitted it through proper channels. Formal request, log timestamp, attached credentials from Central Command. Colonel Hayes came back with a denial inside of 15 minutes, citing ongoing security protocols. She read the response once, typed a brief acknowledgement, logged out. Major Simmons, who had been watching the whole interaction from across the administration office, expected some kind of reaction. A complaint, a callback, a follow-up. Nothing came. She didn't even push back, Simmons mentioned to Hayes the next morning. Good, Hayes said, without looking up from his desk. Then she understands where she stands. But across the base, in her quarters, Aaliyah was already 3 steps ahead of that conclusion. She had expected the denial. She had counted on it. The speed of the denial told her something more valuable than any file would have. Hayes was paying attention. He was monitoring her access requests in real time, which meant he was worried about what she might find. You don't watch something that doesn't threaten you. The base at night ran on a skeleton crew. Perimeter guards on 4-hour rotations. 2 surveillance stations, one at the north entrance, one at the south vehicle bay. Interior cameras on a fixed sweep cycle. Aaliyah walked the base at 2300. She wasn't trying to be invisible. She walked openly, slowly, like someone who couldn't sleep. She moved through the eastern corridor, past the maintenance sheds, along the back edge of the storage warehouses. She stopped at certain points, and seemed to simply breathe the night air. What she was actually doing was counting. The northeast corner of the second warehouse complex fell outside the camera sweep for exactly 40 seconds at the end of each cycle. The access road behind the motor pool connected to an unmonitored gate that appeared locked, but whose chain she noticed had slightly different patterns than the others. It had been opened and reclosed recently. The guard rotation at the south vehicle bay overlapped for 90 seconds every 2 hours, creating a window where both guards were at the same checkpoint and the far side of the bay was unobserved. She noted each of these things and kept walking. Malik was awake when she came back through the eastern bunk corridor. He was sitting outside his quarters on a fold-out chair with a mug of something hot, which meant either he had terrible insomnia or he had been waiting for her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Air inside gets stale," she said. "Takes about a week to adjust. Base air always smells like hydraulic fluid and recycled anxiety." She almost smiled. "Almost. Is that your official assessment, Sergeant?" "Unofficial." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "You've been here one day, and you've already walked the entire east perimeter. Is that a question?" "Might be." She looked at him for a long beat. Malik met her eyes and held them without pressure. He wasn't challenging her. He was genuinely curious, and there was a difference. Most people looked at her like they were trying to win something. He looked like he was trying to understand something. "I like to know where I am," she said finally. "Most people figure that out from a base map. Maps don't tell you everything." He nodded slowly, as if that answer confirmed something he had already been thinking. He didn't ask anything else. She walked past him and into her quarters, and the door closed quietly behind her. She locked it. She set her bag on the cot and opened the false bottom panel. Inside was a compact, encrypted device, not standard issue, not anything that appeared on her listed equipment. She powered it on, waited for the secure handshake, and typed quickly. Phase 1 confirmed. Internal resistance active. Access denial logged. Perimeter assessment complete. Proceeding to Phase 2. She waited. 3 dots appeared. Then, copy. Stay clean. Stay patient. She powered it down, replaced it, and lay back on the cot with her eyes open in the dark. She had a lot of work to do. By the second day, the exclusion had become policy. It wasn't announced. Nobody handed down an order that said, "Leave Commander Brooks out of the loop." It just happened, the way these things always happen in organizations where the person at the top wants something done without anyone being able to point back at him. Meeting notices didn't reach her inbox until after the meetings had ended. Requests she submitted for operational data came back approved, but then stalled in processing quietly, without explanation. When she arrived at the morning coordination session, the roster on the whiteboard didn't include her name. She found a chair and sat in it anyway. Major Simmons looked at Colonel Hayes. Hayes looked at the whiteboard as if he hadn't noticed the discrepancy and was only just seeing it now. "We'll debrief you afterward," he told Aaliyah. "I appreciate that," she said pleasantly, and didn't move. He couldn't kick her out without making it obvious. So he let her stay and pretended it was fine. It wasn't fine. She could see the tension behind his composure, the slight tightness at the edge of his expression, the way he avoided her side of the room when he pointed to the operational map. She sat and listened and remembered everything. The training drill assignment came through her official orders at 0900 on day 3. Routine readiness assessment, it said. Oversight of live-fire coordination exercise. Report to the south field by 0100. Malik saw the orders before she did. He came to find her in the administration corridor with a careful look on his face. "You see what they put you on?" he said, keeping his voice low. "Just read it. That drill hasn't been classified as routine in 2 years. They ran it last spring, and it was a disaster. Communications failure, misaligned fire team coordination, 1 near casualty. It's the kind of exercise that gets flagged for remedial command review." She looked at him, "And now they want me to oversee it." "Yes, ma'am." She thought about this for exactly 2 seconds. "Good," she said. He blinked. "Good. If it goes wrong, they have something on me. If it goes right." She left the sentence where it was and walked toward the south field. There were about 30 soldiers on the drill ground when she arrived. They were not standing at ease. They were standing the way people stand when they're ready to watch something go badly and have already decided who to blame. Private Pierce was there, front and center, with the specific posture of a man who had been promised entertainment. She took position at the command mark and reviewed the scenario outline she had been handed, which she noticed had a section missing. Communication protocols for the third phase of the exercise weren't included in her briefing materials. It was the kind of omission that would have caused a real officer to pause, to wait for clarification, to look uncertain in front of the assembled soldiers. She ran the drill from memory. Not her memory of this base. She had never run this drill before. But she knew the fundamental architecture of live-fire coordination exercises from years of designing them. She restructured the third-phase communication protocol on the fly, assigning radio channels and verbal confirmation cues out loud to the team leads before anyone realized the briefing materials had been incomplete. Pierce watched this happen with narrowing eyes. Then the drill began. For the first 20 minutes, everything ran controlled. Teams moved, communicated, held formation. It was when Pierce, assigned to lead fire Team Charlie, decided to go off script that things got interesting. He broke formation, moved his team wide of the designated corridor in what was clearly meant to be a bold, independent call. The kind of move that either looks like brilliance or disaster depending on how it lands. He was counting on it looking like brilliance. He was counting on showing up the woman running the drill by making a play she hadn't called. The problem was that the corridor he moved his team into was the exact path the opposing team's simulation fire was sweeping across in the third phase. His own team called it before he did. Sergeant Mitchell, we're in the sweep zone. Back right. Move, Aaliyah said calm and loud from the command mark. She had already tracked the vector. Charlie team, back right and hold. Now. Pierce hesitated for exactly one beat too long. Pierce, move your team. He moved them. The drill continued. When it ended, the score log was the highest the South Field exercise had produced in 8 months. The communications held. No simulative casualties. Every phase completed on target. The soldiers didn't applaud, but the quality of their silence was different from before. Pierce said nothing. He left the field without looking at her. She made one note on the drill sheet, signed the bottom, and handed it to the assessor. Lieutenant Daniel Reeves had been watching from the periphery. He was the kind of man who processed things carefully before he decided what he thought about them. Methodical, measured, which in the military usually read as trustworthy, and in this situation was making him quietly uncomfortable. He had been skeptical of Aaliyah Brooks since she arrived. Not hostile the way Pierce was hostile, but genuinely uncertain. She had a mid-level command designation and a vague operational backstory, and yet she moved through problems with a fluency that didn't match her stated experience level. The supply rotation catch in the first briefing. The way she had handled the restricted file denial without complaint. Now this, pulling a drill out of a broken briefing like she had been running this exact exercise for years. He pulled her personnel file that evening and read it 3 times. The file was clean. Too clean. The career progression was plausible. The commendations were legitimate. But there were gaps, small ones, the kind that got smoothed over when someone's records were deliberately edited to support cover. He recognized the pattern because he had seen it once before, 3 years ago, on an entirely different operation. He closed the file and sat with that thought for a long time. The equipment sabotage happened on day 4. Aaliyah was scheduled for a command simulation exercise, a solo assessment, standard procedure for incoming transfer personnel. They gave her a command console and a set of scenario parameters and left her to run it. Someone had gotten to the console first. The calibration on the communication relay was off. Not broken. Broken would be obvious. Off. The kind of subtle miscalibration that would produce bad data in the third phase of the scenario, cause a simulated communications blackout, and generate an assessment score that suggested the commander had made poor decisions under pressure. She detected it in the setup check. She didn't report it. She didn't make a show of discovering it. She simply adjusted her approach, ran the scenario using manual relay protocols instead of the automated system, kept her decision log meticulous, and completed the assessment with a passing score that reflected not the broken tools but the workaround she had executed around them. When the assessor reviewed the results, he found nothing to flag. The person who had tampered with the console found nothing to use. She had given him nothing. Captain Elena Ruiz worked out of a corner office in the intelligence wing that most people on base forgot existed. She was quiet by nature and thorough by profession, and for the past several months, she had been looking at a pattern in the base's logistics records that she couldn't explain. Missing timestamps, cargo manifests that logged out of one sector and never logged into the next, vehicle sign-out records that didn't correspond to any registered operation. Small discrepancies, individually meaningless, but when you laid them side by side. She had laid them side by side. She had a wall in her office with a timeline she kept adding to. On day 4 of Aaliyah's arrival, she pulled a new set of records from the system and found 3 more gaps. All of them centered around the same vehicle pool. All of them during night window hours. She added them to the wall and thought carefully about who on this base she could trust with what she was seeing. The answer was a list of very few names. Colonel Hayes found Aaliyah in the coordination office at 1700 on day 5. The building was mostly empty. He came in and closed the door, which was something he had never done before in any interaction with her. He stood across the desk from her and spoke in the comfortable, controlled tone of a man who is used to being the only threat in the room. "You've made an impression," he said. "Not entirely a good one." She set down what she was reading. "In what way?" "You've been here less than a week, and you've managed to make senior staff uncomfortable, interfere with an established chain of operational decisions, and draw attention to yourself in ways that don't serve your actual assignment here. I ran a drill effectively and submitted accurate reports. You created friction." He put both hands flat on the desk and leaned forward just slightly. Fort Caldwell runs because people understand their lane. New transfers, regardless of their background, come in, do the work assigned to them, and earn credibility over time. That's how this works. She looked at him steadily. "Is that a warning?" He straightened up. His expression didn't change. "It's a reminder of how careers develop. Or don't." She let the silence sit for a breath. "Careers end when truth surfaces," she said. Something moved behind his eyes. It was there and gone in less than a second. Just a flicker of something colder than the performance he was running. But she saw it. He left without another word. She sat in the empty office for a moment, then went back to what she was reading. Malik found her at the Eastern training track at 0600 the next morning. She was running. He fell into step beside her without asking, which she didn't object to. They ran a full lap before he said anything. "Hayes talked to you yesterday." "He did. I heard the tone." She kept her pace even. "Did you?" "Seen that tone used on 3 people in the last 18 months. 2 of them transferred out inside of 2 weeks. 1 filed a formal complaint that quietly disappeared." He glanced at her sideways. "You don't seem like any of those options." "I'm not." He nodded. They ran another half lap. "What do you actually need from me?" She considered the question. Not whether to trust him. She had already made that call. She was deciding how much. Right now, just keep watching. If anything moves through the vehicle pool after 2200 that isn't on the duty roster, I need to know about it. You don't have to do anything else. Just tell me. He processed this quietly. They finished the lap. He stopped at the start point, and she kept going. "Yes, ma'am," he said to her back. That night, in her quarters, Aaliyah powered up the encrypted device and typed the second transmission. "Corruption confirmed. Vehicle pool irregularities documented. Access barriers consistent with active concealment operation. Key personnel identified. Requesting authorization to proceed to documentation phase." The response came back in under a minute. "Authorization granted. Proceed carefully. Do not surface until evidence is airtight. Trust no one beyond your own assessment." She powered it down. She sat in the dark. Outside, the desert wind moved across the base in long, slow currents. The generators hummed. A guard called out a perimeter check through the radio somewhere down the corridor. She thought about the next move, then the one after that, then the one after that. She had been underestimated before. It never stopped being useful. The vehicle pool moved at 2314. Malik had been watching from the shadow of the Eastern maintenance shed for 2 hours by then, sitting still enough that the motion sensor light above the side door never triggered. He counted 3 vehicles, 2 cargo trucks, and a covered transport, pulling out through the unmonitored gate Aaliyah had flagged on her first night. No headlights until they cleared the perimeter. No radio chatter on any channel he could pick up. No duty roster entry. Nothing logged. He memorized the plate numbers and the direction they headed and walked back to his bunk at a pace that wouldn't draw attention. At 0600, he was in the East Corridor when Aaliyah came through on her morning walk to the administration building. 3 vehicles, he said quietly, falling in step beside her. 2314. Un monitored gata. Cargo type, heavy, headed northwest. She didn't break stride. Plates. He recited them. Did anyone else see it? Not that I could tell. Good, she said. Keep it that way. She turned into the administration wing, and he kept walking. Anyone watching would have seen 2 soldiers passing in a corridor. Nothing more. The off-the-books operation had been running for longer than Aaliyah had initially estimated. That much was becoming clear. The vehicle movement Malik had caught wasn't a single event. It was a rotation. The pattern in the logistics gaps Ruiz had been charting suggested shipments moving on a 7 to 10 day cycle, which meant this was structured, practiced, and protected from above. Hayes hadn't built this alone. He was too careful for that. Careful men don't build things alone because shared risk is distributed risk. Someone else was holding part of the ceiling up. Aaliyah sat in the coordination office that morning and did 3 things simultaneously. She processed the routine paperwork on her desk. She listened to the ambient conversations in the corridor outside. And in the back of her mind, she was running the operation's probable architecture. Entry points, dependencies, the kind of command influence you would need to keep something like this invisible inside a high-security base for multiple years. She didn't reach for the restricted files again. She didn't need to. Every time Hayes denied her access, he drew a tighter circle around exactly what she needed to find. At 1100, she made her move. She didn't intercept the operation directly. That would have required resources she hadn't surfaced yet and would have signaled more than she was ready to signal. Instead, she pulled the fuel allocation record for the Northwest Transport Corridor and submitted a routine efficiency audit request through a subordinate administrative channel. It was the kind of request that looked like paperwork, the kind that nobody tracked closely. It redirected a mandatory inspection checkpoint to the Northwest Gate for the following 48 hours. The route Hayes vehicles used would now have to divert. The shipment cycle would break. Not permanently, but enough to slow it down, create pressure, force a decision. She filed the request and went to lunch. The problem was that one of Hayes' men was more attentive than the rest. Staff Sergeant Warren Cole had been on base 7 years and had the particular skill of someone who had learned to survive proximity to power by watching everything and saying very little. He managed vehicle pool logistics and had been Hayes' quiet mechanism for the past 3 years. He noticed the audit request the same afternoon it was filed. He pulled the chain of origin, traced it to the administrative subordinate channel, and then traced that back to who had recently submitted requests through that channel. He was in Hayes' office by 1400. Hayes listened to the briefing with his hands flat on his desk, and his expression giving away nothing. When Cole finished, there was a silence. She didn't touch the files directly, Hayes said. No, sir. She went around them. Yes, sir. Hayes stood and walked to the window. Outside, the drill ground was quiet in the afternoon heat. She knows more than a coordinator should know. Find out what she actually has. Don't approach her directly. Look at what she's been accessing, who she's been talking to, what she carries. Cole nodded once and left. The suspicion had crossed into something harder now. She knows too much. Reeves found her in the equipment bay at 1600, and he didn't come in quietly. He had been sitting on his questions for 4 days, and he had finally run out of patience for sitting. He closed the bay door behind him and stood at a distance that was close enough to be confrontational, but far enough to be controlled. You want to tell me what's actually going on? He said. Aaliyah set down the equipment manifest she had been reviewing and looked at him with the patient attention she gave everything. That's a broad question. You've been here a week. You ran a drill that hasn't gone that clean in 2 years. You caught a calibration problem in the simulation console that the tech team missed. You submitted an audit request through a channel that most people on this base don't know exists. He crossed his arms. That's not a coordinator profile. People contain surprises. Not like that. He moved forward 1 step. I've been doing this long enough to recognize when someone is running a play. I don't know who you're playing for or what the board looks like, but I know you're not here for supply rotation logistics." She looked at him for a long moment. She was making a calculation. She could see the conflict in him clearly enough. Not hostility. Not the self-serving wariness of someone protecting an arrangement. Genuine discomfort with a situation he couldn't categorize. "What you do with that instinct matters," she said finally. "You can take it to Hayes. You can escalate it up the chain and make a lot of noise and create a record of yourself doing the right procedural thing." She held his gaze. "Where you can trust that the discomfort you're feeling isn't about me. It's about what you've been seeing on this base and telling yourself had an explanation." The silence between them stretched. "Follow orders," she said, "or follow truth. That's yours to decide." He stood there for another full beat. Then he turned and walked out without answering. She watched the door close and turned back to the manifest. The intrusion happened at 01:30. She was awake. She had been awake, lying still in the dark with her breathing even and her eyes open. She had anticipated something. Not because she had specific intelligence, because the timeline made it logical. She had created pressure. Pressure produces responses. The door handle moved. Whoever had a key or a pick, the lock disengaged smoothly without force. The door opened 2 inches, paused, then opened further. She was not in the bed. She was in the chair in the far corner, completely still, and the room was dark enough that the figure moving toward the cot didn't see her. They checked the bag on the table, rifled through it quietly, finding the items she had deliberately left accessible. A few unremarkable personal effects. A standard-issue tablet with nothing sensitive on it. A printed duty schedule from her first week that anyone could have pulled from the public roster. They stood there for a moment, empty-handed, then left the way they came. The door clicked shut. She sat in the dark for another 10 minutes, then stood and wrote down the time, duration, and what they had taken, which was nothing. Good. She had prepared for this. The false information she had left out was exactly that. False. Deliberately assembled to confirm whatever Hayes people needed to believe about what she was and wasn't doing here. Let them think the room was clean. Ruiz had not slept well in 3 weeks. Her office wall had become a map of something she couldn't yet prove, but could no longer convince herself to ignore. The timeline of logistics irregularities had expanded. She had cross-referenced vehicle sign-outs, fuel allocation records, and the duty roster gaps Cole managed. And the pattern was unmistakable. The shipments were tied to classified cargo handling, not just unauthorized transport. The cargo designations in the ghosted manifest used codes she had seen once before in an intelligence briefing on illegal weapons routing that had been classified above her clearance level. She sat with that for a long time. The problem was authority. She was an intelligence officer on a base where the commanding officer was the subject of her suspicion. She could not bring this up the chain without going through Hayes. She could not go around Hayes without risking the integrity of whatever was actually happening here. If someone else was already investigating, her interference could compromise it. She needed someone with the standing to receive this evidence and act on it. She looked at her wall. Then she looked at the list of names she had been keeping of people on this base she thought she could trust. Commander Brooks' name was near the top. She hadn't acted on it yet, but she was getting close. Hayes moved against her on day 9. The mechanism was clean. A formal complaint logged through the base disciplinary system. Unauthorized interference with operational logistics, citing the audit request she had filed. Hayes had a subordinate sign it, which kept his name one step removed. By the time Aaliyah received notice that a formal inquiry had been opened, the paperwork was already moving. Simmons delivered the notice in person, which was unusual. She had the careful expression of someone who had been told to watch for a reaction. Aaliyah read the document. "Thank you, Major. You'll need to attend a formal inquiry session at 1400, Simmons said. "I'll be there." Simmons waited for something more. It didn't come. The inquiry room was small and deliberately uncomfortable, a feature, not an accident. 2 officers she had never formally met sat at the table across from her. Hayes was not in the room, which was either protocol or strategy. She assumed both. They walked through the audit request. They asked about her decision-making process, her chain of authorization, her understanding of her own operational scope. She answered each question with precise, careful language. She explained the efficiency rationale for the audit. She referenced the administrative channel that authorized it. She produced a printed copy of the procedural handbook that confirmed the request type was within coordinator scope. There was nothing they could hold. They asked if she had any other outstanding requests or actions that fell outside her stated assignment. No, she said. She was telling the truth. Every action she had taken was technically within the bounds of her cover assignment. She had been meticulous about that. The inquiry stalled. At the close of the session, she gathered her documents. The two officers exchanged a glance. She walked out into the corridor. Hayes was standing 15 feet away, watching her emerge. She walked toward him. When she was close enough that only he could hear her, she stopped. "You should have checked who signed your last transfer approval," she said quietly. She kept walking. Behind her, she heard nothing. No response, no footsteps. She didn't look back, but Hayes had gone completely still. He stood in the corridor for a long moment after she turned the corner, and for the first time since she had arrived, he was not performing certainty. He was thinking. The assembly was called at 0800 on day 11. Full base. No exceptions. The announcement came through official channels with Hayes' command authorization attached, and the framing was administrative, a scheduled operational review. But the word moved through the base the way words always do in closed environments, faster than the official version and more detailed. The review was about Commander Brooks. By the time soldiers filed into the assembly courtyard, the broad shape of what was coming had already circulated. She had overstepped. She had interfered with operations. There was a formal complaint on record. Hayes was going to make it formal. Pierce was early. He positioned himself where he would have a good sight line to the front of the assembly. Reeve sat in the back row and did not talk to anyone. He had spent the previous 2 days going back through orders. Not his current orders, but old ones. Requests that had passed through his desk over the past 8 months that he had signed off on without examining closely because they came wrapped in the right language and the right authorization signatures. He pulled 3 of them now and laid them side by side. The authorization signatures matched, but the operation codes they referenced didn't correspond to anything in the official mission log. They corresponded to nothing at all, which meant they corresponded to something that wasn't supposed to exist. He thought about the conversation in the equipment bay. Follow orders, or follow truth. He looked at the papers in his hand. He looked at the front of the assembly courtyard, where Hayes was taking his position at the command podium. He folded the papers and put them in his jacket pocket. Elena Ruiz did not go to the assembly immediately. She was in her office, and she was looking at the last piece of evidence she had needed to look at for 3 days, but kept stopping short of, the way you stop short of a door you know you can't unopen. It was a cargo manifest, a real one, not a ghost record. It had been filed and processed and signed. And at the bottom, in the authorization field, was Hayes' name. Clear, unambiguous, attached to a cargo designation that belonged to a weapons routing classification she had confirmed through a back channel with a contact at Central Command. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. This was evidence. She needed someone who could receive it with the authority to act on it. She had made her decision about who that was. She printed 3 copies, sealed them in separate envelopes, and put them in her jacket. Then she went to the assembly. Aaliyah was already at the front of the courtyard when Hayes arrived at the podium. She had not been summoned to stand there. She had simply positioned herself there, the way she positioned herself everywhere on this base, with intention. The soldiers assembled around her. She could feel the weight of the crowd, not physical but atmospheric, the specific pressure of collective judgment gathering itself. Some of the soldiers were simply watching. Some of them had already decided. Pierce, from his position across the courtyard, had the anticipatory stillness of someone who had already written the ending. Even Malik, standing near the east edge of the assembly, had something uncertain in his expression that she noticed but didn't react to. It was supposed to feel like standing alone. She was aware of that. She understood it as a tactic. She breathed through it and kept her posture exactly as it had been every day since she arrived, straight, unhurried, present. Hayes stepped to the podium and opened the folder in his hand. "We have a duty to operational integrity," he said in the resonant command voice she had watched him use in every public setting. The voice that had probably moved rooms for 25 years and knew how to fill a courtyard just as well. When that integrity is compromised by personnel who operate outside their designated scope, outside the authority granted to them, and outside the trust placed in them by this command, there must be accountability. Murmurs in the assembly. Agreement from some corners. Commander Aaliyah Brooks has been present on this base for 11 days. He let that sit. 11 days felt like damning brevity. In that time, she has interfered with established operational procedures, submitted unauthorized requests through back channels, created friction in command relationships, and demonstrated a pattern of behavior inconsistent with her stated assignment. He read the charges with the careful pace of someone who had prepared this and knew the weight each word was supposed to carry. Insubordination, unauthorized action, conduct unbecoming the standards of Fort Caldwell. The courtyard was very quiet. Hayes set the folder down and looked at her directly. "Commander Brooks," he said, "this command is prepared to offer you one resolution to this situation." He glanced away from her, just briefly, the way you look away when you're saying something you want to seem like it costs you something. In acknowledgement of your career record, you will be given the opportunity to accept reassignment voluntarily. No court-martial, a clean record. You pack your bag today. He was offering her the door, the graceful exit, the version that let him keep everything intact and let her keep her dignity, theoretically. She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. A ripple through the courtyard. Pierce straightened slightly. Someone in the back row whispered something. Hayes' expression shifted very slightly. He had not seriously expected her to say no. The offer was designed to be taken. It was designed to make her disappear without the mess of what came next. "Then this command will proceed with formal disciplinary action," he said, "including suspension of your operational status, pending full review." He reached for the suspension order in his folder. She held herself completely still. Around the courtyard, she could feel the balance tipping. The assembly of soldiers who had spent 11 days watching her, doubting her, mocking her, or quietly wondering about her. They were reading the room the way soldiers read rooms, which is to say they were looking at who had power and adjusting themselves accordingly. Most of them were adjusting toward Hayes. Malik's hands were clasped behind his back, and his jaw was tight, and he was looking at her with an expression she recognized. "Tell me this isn't actually over." She gave him nothing. She gave the courtyard nothing. Hayes pulled the suspension order from the folder. And then, from the main gate, a sound. Engines. Multiple vehicles. Not the ordinary rumble of base traffic. Something heavier, coordinated. The sound of a convoy that had been traveling fast and had arrived with purpose. Everyone heard it. Heads turned toward the gate. 3 black SUVs rolled through the main entrance in tight formation. High command insignia on the doors. Federal plate codes that senior officers recognized on sight. They stopped at the edge of the assembly courtyard. For a moment, nothing happened. The stillness was the loudest thing on the base. The rear door of the center vehicle opened. A figure in full senior command dress stepped out. Behind him, 2 officers in intelligence designation uniform. Behind them, 2 more in standard command dress. The senior officer looked at the assembly. He looked at Hayes at the podium. He looked at Aaliyah standing in front of it. He spoke in a voice that carried across the entire courtyard without effort. "Stand down. You are addressing Admiral Aaliyah Brooks." The words landed like something physical. For exactly 1 second, nobody moved. Then, one by one, and then all at once, every soldier in the courtyard came to attention. Every soldier except Hayes. Hayes stood at the podium with the suspension order in his hand and the expression of a man who has just watched the floor open beneath him and has not yet processed that he is falling. Aaliyah turned and looked at him. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Hayes' mouth moved. Something that was trying to form itself into a response. Protocol, challenge, procedural objection. The suspension order was still in his hand. He looked at it like it had become a different object than the one he had picked up. "There must be a misunderstanding," he said. His voice had lost its courtyard resonance. It was smaller now. "I wasn't informed." The senior official stepped forward and held out a sealed document. "Colonele, your command is suspended pending formal investigation. Please surrender the order in your hand." Hayes did not move for 2 full seconds. Then he set the suspension order down on the podium. The document was taken from a senior official's hand by one of the intelligence officers and brought forward. It was placed, not handed, placed with the specific formality of something that cannot be argued with, on the podium in front of where Hayes was standing. He looked at it. He looked at Aaliyah. She was already moving. She stepped to the center of the courtyard and turned to face the assembled soldiers. The silence around her was total now, not the hostile silence of collective judgment, but something different, the specific silence of people recalibrating everything they thought they understood. Private Pierce had gone pale. He was standing exactly where he had positioned himself for a good view of her humiliation, and he had not moved, which meant he had the best view of something else entirely. Reeves, from the back row, had his hand over the pocket where he had folded those papers. He was looking at her with an expression that she recognized as the particular quality of someone understanding, all at once, a great number of things. "At ease," she said. The posture shifted, slightly. The attention held. "My name is Admiral Aaliyah Brooks. I was assigned to Fort Caldwell 11 days ago, not as a transfer coordinator, but as an embedded auditor under direct authorization from the highest level of this command structure." She spoke at the same volume she always used, measured, clear. No performance of power, just the thing itself. "I am here because there is an active, unauthorized operation running through this base. I am here because that operation has been protected from within at the command level for an extended period of time. And I am here because it ends now." Nobody spoke. She turned to the intelligence officers who had come with the convoy. "Secure all base communications. Lock down the transport logs and vehicle pool access. I want every outgoing channel frozen until further notice." "Yes, Admiral." She looked at the senior official. "The evidence package from Captain Ruiz needs to be formally received and logged." "Understood." She turned back to the base. "Return to your posts," she said. "This base remains operational. Your commanding officer has changed. That's all." The assembly began to disperse, not chaotically, but with the dazed, deliberate movement of people who needed to walk somewhere to process what they had just witnessed. Hayes was still at the podium. One of the intelligence officers had moved to stand beside him without touching him, which was its own kind of statement. He looked at Aaliyah as she walked past. "You think I'm on top of this?" he said. Not loudly, almost himself. The smirk that crossed his face was small and involuntary, the kind of thing that escapes before you can catch it. She stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. The first time since she had arrived at Fort Caldwell that something moved behind her eyes that wasn't calculation. Something tighter. Something that understood exactly what that smirk meant. "I know you're not," she said quietly. She walked away. Behind her, Hayes was escorted from the podium. The suspension document remained on it, face up in the desert sun. The words were still hanging in the air when the first soldier snapped to attention. It happened the way dominoes fall, one, then the row beside it, then the whole field of them, fast and inevitable. Soldiers who had spent 11 days whispering about the transfer coordinator, who had eaten lunch 15 feet from her and made jokes loud enough to carry, who had signed off on meetings she wasn't invited to and processed orders that bypassed her desk. They came to attention now with the mechanical precision of people whose bodies understood the situation before their minds had finished processing it. Private Pierce did not snap to attention. He stood where he was and went the color of old concrete. Hayes still had not moved from beside the podium. The suspension document lay face up on it in the hard desert sun, and he was looking at it the way a man looks at something that has materialized out of a world he no longer fully recognizes. Aaliyah let the silence hold for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough to be felt, sure enough to stay controlled. "At ease," she said. The posture across the courtyard shifted, not relaxed exactly. Nobody was relaxed. But the rigid attention broke into something more human, and in that small adjustment, she could read the whole room at once. Confusion on most faces. Recognition dawning on a few. Reeves at the back, with his hand still pressed against the pocket where those folded papers were, looking at her with an expression that was somewhere between relief and the specific shame of someone who has been wrong about the right person. Malik at the east edge exhaled, just once, quietly, but she noticed it. The senior official, Brigadier General Charles Weston, though she hadn't used his name yet because she didn't need to, his insignia was enough, stepped forward and offered her a sealed portfolio. She took it without breaking her address of the courtyard. Hayes found his voice somewhere in the silence. It was smaller than his courtyard voice had ever been, but he was reaching for it with both hands. There's clearly been a miscommunication at the command level, he said. I was not given notification of any embedded operation. Protocol requires. Colonelle. She turned to look at him. Just that, his name, and her eyes on him, and the particular quality of her stillness. He stopped. Your command authorization was suspended as of the moment General Weston's convoy cleared that gate, she said. Anything you were in the middle of doing, including that sentence, stopped being your business at that moment. Weston, who had stepped to her left and slightly behind her, produced another document from his jacket and held it forward. One of the intelligence officers carried it to Hayes. Formal notification of suspension, Weston said. Pending investigation into unauthorized operations, misuse of classified logistics infrastructure, and obstruction of command-level audit authority. Hayes took the document. He looked at it. The performance of composure he had maintained for 11 days was cracking at the edges now. Not collapsing, he was too practiced for full collapse, but the cracks were visible. His jaw was slightly too tight. His eyes moved a fraction too fast. He looked at Aaliyah one more time. I wasn't given, he started again. You weren't given notice, she said, because the operation you were protecting would have been moved the moment you had it. That was the design. She turned back to the courtyard. She was done with him. The base reacted to the next 20 minutes the way water reacts when you drop something heavy into it, rings expanding outward, disrupting everything they reached. Aaliyah issued orders in the sequence she had planned for 11 days, each one precise, no hesitation between them. Secure all outgoing communications. Freeze the vehicle pool. Pull every transport log from the past 6 months into a locked evidence archive. Detain logistics personnel pending individual review. She assigned the intelligence officers to specific stations and gave Weston's team the access codes they needed to work through the base's administrative system without routing through Hayes' compromised command layer. It took 14 minutes to lock the base down from the inside. She watched it happen from the center of the courtyard, turning when she needed to, speaking when she needed to, and the rest of the time simply present, the way she had been present every day since she arrived, except now the room understood what that presence meant. Pierce had finally moved. He was standing near the east wall with 2 other soldiers, and his face had settled into something that wasn't quite shame and wasn't quite anger, and was probably going to take him a while to sort out. She noted him and moved on. Hayes made his last attempt at 15 minutes in. He had been standing near the podium under the quiet supervision of an intelligence officer and apparently decided that quiet supervision was a softer boundary than it looked. He straightened up and addressed Weston directly, bypassing her. General, I have documentation that establishes direct authorization from the deputy command level for the operations in question. Whatever is in that file, he gestured toward the evidence portfolio, needs to be reviewed in that context. I'm requesting an immediate channel to deputy command. Weston looked at him with the patient neutrality of a man who had heard a great many things in his career and was not surprised by any of them. He looked at Aaliyah. She stepped forward. Colonel, she said, your deputy command authorization requests route through this office now. She held up the sealed portfolio. I am the higher authorization. The channel you're requesting goes through me, and I'm telling you to sit down. The intelligence officer at Hayes' left shifted his position by exactly 2 inches. Hayes sat down. Captain Elena Ruiz had come through the east entrance of the courtyard during the command transfer and was standing near the back with her sealed envelopes pressed flat against her ribs under her crossed arms, watching everything with the expression of someone who has been carrying a heavy thing for a long time and is trying to decide if it is safe to put it down yet. Aaliyah spotted her from across the courtyard. She crossed to her directly, which meant walking through the dispersing crowd of soldiers, and then moved out of her path with an instinctive deference that would have felt different 11 days ago. She stopped in front of Ruiz. "You have evidence." Ruiz looked at her for one careful moment. Then she reached into her jacket and produced the envelopes. Cargo manifests, logistics gap documentation, a confirmed connection to a classified weapons routing designation. She paused. Hayes' signature on the primary manifest. Original copy, not a reprint. Aaliyah took the envelopes. "How long have you been building this?" "For months." "Alone?" "Yes." She held Ruiz's eyes for a beat. "You've been watching. Quietly. Carefully. And you waited until you had something that couldn't be dismissed." She tucked the envelopes into the portfolio. "You're part of this investigation now. Formally. I need you working with my intelligence team on the logistics pattern, specifically the multi-base routing." Ruiz straightened slightly. Not a snap to attention. Something more personal than that. "Yes, Admiral." "Good." She turned. "Come with me." Ruiz was waiting at the edge of the courtyard. He wasn't performing waiting. He wasn't leaning against anything or looking at his watch. He was simply standing still, facing her direction, with the papers from his pocket now held in his hand. He had taken them out at some point during the last 20 minutes and was holding them the way you hold something you've decided to stop hiding. She walked to him. She took the papers he held out without him needing to explain them. She looked at the operation codes. She looked at the authorization signatures beside them. She looked at him. "How long did it take you to see it?" "Longer than it should have," he said. "No deflection. No covering language." "When did you start looking?" "The equipment bay," he said. After he talked, "I went back through orders that night." She nodded once. "These go into the evidence package." She held the papers. "And you go on record as the officer who identified the falsified codes." He looked at her steadily. "I doubted you. Most people did. That's not an excuse." "No," she agreed. "It's not. But what you do now matters more than what you did then." She looked at him directly. "I need a field lieutenant I can trust. Someone who knows this base, knows the personnel, and won't flinch when this gets harder. And it's going to get harder." He met her gaze without blinking. "I'm in." "Then you're in," she said simply. "I'll brief you this afternoon." She walked past him into the command building, and Ruiz and Weston fell in behind her, and the courtyard finished clearing around the space where Hayes had been standing, and the base, divided for 11 days into people who doubted her and people who stayed quiet, reorganized itself around a new center of gravity. She had work to do. The command office had been Hayes for 6 years. She could still feel him in it, not sentimentally, but structurally. The desk was positioned to face the door in a way that maximized psychological dominance over anyone entering. The shelving was arranged to keep personal commendations visible at eye level. The secondary monitor faced the wall, angled so that Hayes could see it without anyone seated across from him having the same view. She did not rearrange the furniture. She sat behind the desk and opened the base's full system archive, and she began to read. The hidden logs went back further than she had expected. Not months, years. The earliest irregular vehicle movement she could confirm was 31 months ago, which meant this operation had been running for nearly 3 years under routine base administration, protected by Hayes' command authority and sustained by what she was increasingly certain was a structured support system that did not begin and end with one colonel at one desert base. She was still reading at 0200 when Ruiz knocked and came in. "You should see this," Ruiz said, and set a printed timeline on the desk without preamble. The timeline covered 14 months. Ruiz had been building it from logistics records and cross-referencing it against publicly accessible military supply chain data, the kind of cross-referencing that nobody at the base level was supposed to have the patience or the context to do. She had done it because she was the kind of person who couldn't let a pattern go once she saw it. The pattern was this. The shipments that moved through Fort Caldwell's unmonitored gate were not staying in Nevada. They were routed northwest to a distribution hub in a secondary facility. From there, they split, one line moving to a third facility in a different state, the second line going dark entirely. The third facility had a logistics designation Ruiz had identified through the classified weapons routing codes on the manifests, And when she matched those codes against the briefing she had accessed through her intelligence clearance, the picture that assembled itself was one that neither of them had been fully prepared for. "This isn't a single base operation," Ruiz said. She tapped the timeline. "Fort Caldwell is a node. There are at least 2 other facilities running the same routing pattern. Possibly more." Aaliyah looked at the timeline for a long time without speaking. "How confident are you in this?" "In the Fort Caldwell documentation, completely. In the secondary facilities, high confidence. I can't confirm the full network size without access to the other base's internal logs." Aaliyah straightened up from the desk and walked to the window. Outside, the base was dark and quiet under its lockdown. The perimeter lights ran their slow, reliable arcs. Nothing moved. 3 years, multiple facilities, a routing network sophisticated enough to stay invisible inside a classified military infrastructure. This was not a rogue colonel running a side operation for personal gain. This was architecture. "Who else has seen this?" she said. "Just you. Keep it that way until I say otherwise." Hayes was being held in a secured administrative room. Not a cell. Not yet. That determination belonged to the formal proceeding that hadn't started yet. When Aaliyah came to see him the next morning, she sat across from him with nothing on the table between them. No files, no documents. Just the 2 of them in the small room, and the particular silence of a space where the power arrangement has been permanently resolved. Hayes looked different without the courtyard. Not diminished exactly. He still had the jaw and the silver hair and the posture of a man who had spent decades being the authority in every room he entered. But something had come off him. The performance had quieted down because there was nobody left to perform for. "I'm not going to ask you about the cargo," she said. "I already have the manifests." He looked at her with flat, careful eyes. "I'm going to ask you something simpler." She held his gaze. "The authorization structure above you. How many layers?" Nothing from him. "Victor." She used his first name without ceremony, not as warmth, but as the removal of his rank title, a small, precise thing. "You built something that required protection from above. You didn't have the standing to create that protection yourself. Someone gave it to you. I want to know who." He leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. When he looked back at her, something had shifted in his expression. Not cooperation. Something more complicated than cooperation. "You're already too late," he said. The words were quiet. They were not a taunt. They were delivered with the specific weight of something factual. She studied him. Too late for what? He looked at her for another long beat. Then he looked away. "There's a shipment scheduled within the next 24 hours, he said. "Not through this base. You've locked this one down. That's already been accounted for. The network doesn't stop because one node goes offline." He paused. "You've been watching me. You've been watching this base. But the operation you're actually looking for isn't here. It hasn't been here for a while." He said nothing more. She sat with that for a moment. Then she stood. "Thank you, Colonel," she said, and meant it in the way you mean it when someone has just told you more than they intended to. Malik found it at 1400. He had been assigned to the vehicle pool documentation team. His knowledge of the physical layout made him the most useful person for cross-referencing the physical sign-out records against the digital logs. He was halfway through a crate of paper manifests from the past 18 months when he pulled a file that made him stop. It was a shipping order. Legitimate formatting, legitimate signatures, legitimate routing code. Except the routing code was one of the ones Ruiz had flagged on her wall. And the scheduled date on the shipping order was tomorrow. It was for a facility 2 states away. The cargo description was listed as medical equipment. He photographed the document and walked it directly to the command office. Aaliyah read it once. Where was this file? Physical records. Not in the digital system at all, which meant it had been intentionally kept out of the searchable archive, which meant someone had planned for the digital system to be reviewed and had kept this particular record somewhere they thought a digital audit wouldn't reach. She looked at Reeves, who was at the secondary desk reviewing the falsified operation codes. "We have a live shipment. Different facility. 24 hours. He was already reaching for his radio. The interception plan came together in 3 hours. Reeves coordinated the field logistics, 2 teams, light configuration, vehicle intercept at a highway junction 40 miles from the secondary facility. Ruiz ran the intelligence layer, tracking the shipping order against known network routing points and identifying the most probable vehicle and timing. Aaliyah worked the authorization structure, pulling in Weston's resources and securing a secondary command sanction that gave them jurisdiction outside Fort Caldwell's physical perimeter. They moved at 2200. It was a clean night. Cold desert air, clear sky, the kind of darkness that sits flat and absolute between the highway lights. Reeves led the field team. Aaliyah stayed on comm, running the operation from the mobile command vehicle that Weston's convoy had brought. At 2340, the field team reached the intercept junction. At 2352, the target convoy came into range. Visual on 3 vehicles, Reeves said through the comm configuration matches. Moving to intercept. The intercept was textbook. The convoy was stopped without incident. The field team moved to secure the vehicles, and Reeves went to the cargo hold of the lead truck personally. The comm was quiet for 20 seconds. Admiral, his voice was careful. You need to hear this. Go ahead. The cargo hold is empty. She heard him. She processed it. All 3 vehicles? Checking now. A pause. Yes. All 3. Empty. She sat in the mobile command vehicle and looked at the comm panel and understood immediately what had happened, because Hayes had told her something that she had not fully heard. The network doesn't stop because one node goes offline. You've been watching me, but the operation you're looking for isn't here. He had told her she was too late. He had been right about the timing, if not the location. The shipment she was intercepting was a decoy. The real cargo had moved while she was focused on this. Reeves, she said, stand down the intercept. Secure the vehicles and driver for processing. Come back. Copy. She closed the comm channel and sat in the quiet dark for a moment. They had been watching her intercept the decoy. Whoever was running this network had known about the interception plan, which meant they had a source of information inside her operation. Someone with access to what she was doing in real time. There was a leak. Active, current, and close. She was back on base by 0200. The first thing she did was pull the access logs for every system that had touched the interception plan, who had seen the shipping order, who had been in the room when the plan was assembled, who had access to the comm channels. She ran the list herself, alone, in a command office with the door closed. The list was not long. She looked at it carefully. At 0315, the base's internal monitoring system flagged an anomalous data packet leaving through an encrypted channel. Not a standard communication, a compressed data burst, the kind used for passing information quickly and quietly to an external receiver. The origin point was inside the base. She traced the packet to its source terminal in 4 minutes. The terminal was in the logistics coordination office, the same office that managed outgoing shipment documentation and had access to the interception plan through the evidence archive she had opened to her core team. She stood in the doorway of the logistics office and looked at the terminal. Then she looked at the duty roster for who had accessed that terminal in the past 6 hours. One name, Senior Logistics Officer Major Thomas Greer. 15 years on base. Trusted by everyone who had worked with him. He had processed supply orders for the base's entire operational history and had been commended for it 3 times. He was the kind of officer who became invisible through sheer reliability. You stopped seeing the person and just saw the function. He had been feeding information out of this base for longer than Hayes had known who Aaliyah was. She did not go to his quarters immediately. She sat in the logistics office and looked at the terminal and thought about what Hayes had said. You think I'm atop of this? And the smirk that went with it. Greer wasn't the top either. At 0400, Aaliyah sat in the command office with Ruiz and Reeves. Weston was patched in by secure channel from the mobile unit outside. It was the kind of hour that strips everything down to what matters. She put Greer's name on the table. She walked through the evidence. Nobody interrupted her. When she finished, the room was quiet for a moment. He had access to everything, Reeves said. It wasn't a question. Everything we touched in the past 24 hours, she confirmed. The shipping order, the interception plan, the comm channels. All of it went to him through legitimate operational access. Nobody flagged it because it was supposed to go to him. How long? Ruiz asked. Based on the packet pattern, at least 18 months. Possibly longer. She paused. He wasn't working for Hayes. Hayes didn't know about him. Reeves looked up from the desk. He was working for whoever is above Hayes. And reporting back on whatever Hayes was doing, whatever I was doing, probably whatever anyone was doing who got close to this network. She looked at the desk surface for a moment. He's not doing this for money. The communication pattern is too patient for that. Too careful. Someone who does this for money gets sloppy when the risk goes up. He got more precise. She sat back. He believes in what he's doing. What is he doing? Ruiz said. That, Elias said, is what we need to find out. She went to see Greer herself, without backup, at 05:30. She knocked on his quarters door and waited. He answered in uniform, which told her something. He had heard the base stir in the past few hours and had dressed for whatever came next. He was a trim man in his late 40s with the kind of forgettable face that served a particular kind of purpose. When he saw her, his expression registered nothing. Not surprise, not fear, not even resignation. Just a steady, considered calm that she recognized because she had spent 11 days wearing it herself. Admiral, he said. Major Greer. She did not move to enter. She stood in the doorway. I know about the data bursts. I know about the channel. I know you knew about the interception before we executed it. She held his gaze. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm here because I want to understand what you think you're doing. He looked at her for a long moment. You want to understand, he said, as if considering whether the offer was genuine. I want to understand. Yes. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then, come in. She stepped inside. He did not sit, and neither did she. They stood in the small, clean space of his quarters with the first gray light of morning beginning at the window. The weapons routing you're investigating, he said. You think it's corruption, personal gain, a colonel in a network of operators moving illegal cargo for profit. Isn't it? Parts of it. He looked at her directly. But the people above Hayes aren't doing this for profit. They believe they are stabilizing something, managing threats that legitimate channels can't move fast enough to address. The weapons in those shipments aren't going to criminal buyers. He paused. They're going to people fighting things that our government has decided it cannot officially acknowledge fighting. She looked at him without reaction. And you believe that justifies it. I believe the world is more complicated than the authorization structures we use to navigate it. Something moved in his expression, not doubt exactly, a kind of weariness. I've been watching this operation for 3 years. The people running it are not careless. They're not greedy. They are genuinely convinced they are doing necessary work. And what do you believe? He looked at the window. Outside, the desert was beginning to lighten at the edges. I believe, he said slowly, that I may have been watching it long enough that I stopped being able to tell the difference between conviction and justification. She let that sit in the room between them. Major Greer, she said, I need the name of the external contact. The person above Hayes. The one you've been reporting to. He looked at her for a long time. Then, at 05:47, with the first pale light breaking over the desert, he gave her the name. She kept her expression exactly still. She thanked him and left his quarters and walked back through the quiet base corridors to the command office. She sat behind Hayes' desk in the gray morning light and looked at the wall across from her. She had the name now, and what came with the name was the full understanding of what Hayes had meant. You think I'm atop of this? The external orchestrator was not military. The external orchestrator held a civilian position that sat above military accountability in the particular way that certain civilian positions did. Positions that could authorize, fund, and protect operations that never appeared in any log under the specific justification that some threats required solutions that could not be officially named. Her encrypted device buzzed once on the desk. She looked at it. A message had arrived on the secure channel. Admiral Brooks, stand down. This goes above your rank. She read it twice. She set the device down. She looked at the gray morning through the command office window for a long moment. Then she began to plan. The name Greer had given her was Richard Calloway, not a general, not a flag officer, not anyone whose name appeared on a military command structure at any level. Richard Calloway was a deputy director of a civilian oversight body that sat between the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, one of those positions that existed in the administrative space between institutions, where accountability became a question of which chain of authority you asked and whether they were willing to answer. He had the kind of power that didn't require a uniform. She sat with his name in the gray morning light and mapped what she knew about him against what Greer had told her. And the picture that assembled itself was not a simple one. Calloway had been operating this network for 7 years. He had built it gradually, routing resources through facilities where he had cultivated compliant commanding officers. Hayes had been one of several. The weapons moving through the network were going to proxy actors in conflict zones that the United States government could not officially touch without triggering international consequences. Calloway believed, with apparently complete sincerity, that he was doing the work that legitimate channels were too slow and too visible to do. He was wrong, but he was not stupid, and he was not careless, and he had been doing this for 7 years without anyone assembling enough evidence in one place to move against him. Until now, she powered up the encrypted device and typed one line. "I have a name," requesting full authorization to proceed. The response came back in 4 minutes. "Authorization granted. You have 48 hours before this surfaces externally. Move." 48 hours. She set the device down and went to find Reeves. The lockdown she called at 0700 was different from the one on the day of the reveal. That one had been about securing the base. This one was about trust. She gathered her core team in the command office. Reeves, Ruiz, Weston, and 3 intelligence officers from Weston's convoy. She closed the door. She told them about the data burst, about Greer, about the compromised interception. She told them what Greer had given her and what it meant for the operation scope. Then she told them that going forward, every element of the final operation would be compartmentalized. Each person in the room would know their piece and only their piece. No full picture would exist in any single person's hands except hers. Reeves looked at her steadily. "You don't trust us." "I trust everyone in this room," she said. "I trusted everyone who touched the interception plan. Compartmentalization isn't about trust. It's about limiting the damage when something goes wrong." She looked at each of them in turn. And something always goes wrong. Nobody argued. The mole hunt had lasted 4 hours and ended with Greer. But she ran it again anyway. The full process, every access log, every communication record, every personnel movement during the 48 hours after the reveal. She was not looking for another Greer. She was confirming there wasn't one. There wasn't. But the process surfaced something she hadn't expected. Among Greer's outgoing data bursts, pulled from the encrypted channel records, was a communication she hadn't seen before, sent 3 days before her arrival at Fort Caldwell. Before she had landed. Before anyone on this base should have known she was coming. Greer had known she was coming, which meant Calloway had known. She sat with that for a long moment. Calloway had known an Admiral was being embedded at Fort Caldwell before she arrived. He had not moved to stop it. He had not pulled his operation back. He had let her come in and let her spend 11 days building her case. And then he had fed her a decoy and sent a message to her secure channel telling her to stand down. He had been testing her. Or, more precisely, he had been deciding whether she was the kind of problem he needed to solve quietly or the kind he needed to confront. The threatening message was his answer. He had decided to confront. She thought about this for a long time. Then she called Reeves. "Change of plan," she said. "He knows we're coming, so we don't go to him." Reeves paused. "Then how?" "We make him come to us." Reeves' breakthrough came at 1100. He had been working through the encrypted communications Greer had received. Not the ones going out, the ones coming in. The instructions, the routing updates, the authorization codes for each shipment. They were compressed and layered, but the intelligence officers had been peeling them back for 6 hours, and at 1100, they found one that had been sent 8 days ago containing something Calloway had not intended to include. An external IP origin point, unmasked by a technical error in the compression layer. It was a fraction of a second of exposure in the encryption, the kind of thing that happened when someone's technical infrastructure was very good but not perfect. It was enough. The origin point traced to a private communications facility registered to a civilian consulting firm in Washington. The firm's address was 2 blocks from Calloway's office building. Reeves put it on the desk in front of her. "He made one mistake," he said. She looked at the trace. "Everyone makes one." She pulled Weston in immediately. The origin point, combined with Greer's testimony and the cargo manifest evidence Ruiz had assembled, gave them enough for a formal authorization to compel Calloway's appearance before a secured investigative channel. Not an arrest, his civilian standing made that a longer process. But a compelled appearance before a secured channel was something Weston had the authority to initiate, and with the evidence package they now held, it would hold. Weston made the call at 12:30. By 1400, Calloway had been formally notified. By 1500, he had accepted, which told her something important about him. He was still confident. He still believed he had a play left. The secured channel opened at 1700. It was a video link, encrypted end-to-end, running through a government communications system that both parties had authorized access to. On Calloway's end, he would have legal counsel present and probably a communications advisor. On her end, it was her, Ruiz, and a recording system logging every frame. She had done this before. Not this exact situation, but the shape of it. A person who believed their position protected them, sitting across from her on a screen, deciding whether to perform innocence or perform authority. Calloway chose authority. He was a trim man in his 60s with the particular grooming of someone who had spent a career in rooms where appearance was leverage. His suit was expensive without being obvious about it. His expression when the link opened was somewhere between cooperative and condescending. The expression of a man who has agreed to a meeting he believes he can control. "Admiral Brooks," he said, "I appreciate you making time." "Mr. Calloway." She kept her hands flat on the table in front of her. No documents in view. No performance of preparation. "I want to start with a simple question. How long have you been running this network?" He smiled slightly. "That's a characterization I'd push back on. What I've been involved in is a series of authorized operations conducted under oversight structures that—" Richard. She used his first name the same way she had used Hayes, as the removal of a title, not as warmth. "I have your signature on authorization codes for 17 separate shipments. I have the IP trace from your communications facility. I have testimony from Major Greer. And I have cargo manifests that connect this network to weapons routing through 3 military installations." She paused. "The authorization structures you're about to describe do not exist in any document that any oversight body has on record. So let's not spend the next hour on that." The smile faded. Not into fear, into something more calculated. "You're very confident," he said. "I'm accurate," she said. "There's a difference." He leaned back slightly. "What you're looking at is an operation built over 7 years to address threats that legitimate channels have consistently failed to manage. The weapons in those shipments have prevented 3 separate incidents in conflict zones that would have cost American lives if we had waited for formal authorization processes too. Those authorization processes exist for a reason," she said. "They exist because they're politically convenient, not because they're effective." He looked at her directly now, and she could see the genuine conviction in it. The same thing Greer had described, the same thing that made this more complicated than simple corruption. "I've been doing this work longer than you've held your current rank, Admiral. The threats I've been managing don't wait for congressional approval cycles. And the people who die when unregistered weapons move through unaccountable networks," she said, "do they wait?" He was quiet for a moment. "Collateral cost," he said. "Every operation has it. Including this one," she said. "Including what happens to you now." His expression changed, just slightly. The confidence recalibrated into something harder. "You have evidence," he said. "I have reach. I have relationships at levels that will determine how this evidence is received, who reviews it, and what timeline that review operates on." He leaned forward. "I sent you a message this morning. I meant it as a warning. I'm extending it now as a practical reality. Stand down, Admiral. Walk this back. Your career is not worth a 7-year operation that is serving genuine national interests." She looked at him for a long, level moment. "My career," she said quietly, "is not what I came here for." She reached to her left and placed a single document in front of the camera. It was a court authorization, not a military one, a civilian federal court authorization, processed through a channel Calloway's relationships did not reach, signed by a federal judge Weston had woken up at 5 that morning. It compelled the immediate preservation of all records connected to Callaway's communications facility. It froze the consulting firm's operational status, and it named Richard Callaway as a subject of active federal criminal investigation. He looked at it on his screen. His legal counsel, just visible at the edge of the frame, leaned forward. "That's been active since 1400 today," she said. "Before this call, before you agreed to join it." She held his gaze. "You thought you were coming in to close this down. You came in to be on the record when it opened." He said nothing. "Mr. Callaway," she said, "this is over." She closed the channel. The final operation ran that night. Hayes, sitting in his administrative holding room and watching his own situation become irreversible, had made a decision sometime in the afternoon. It was not redemption. She was clear-eyed enough about him not to dress it as that. It was self-preservation, and it came in the form of one specific piece of information: the location of the actual shipment. The real cargo that had moved while she intercepted the decoy. It was sitting in a distribution warehouse 40 miles from the secondary facility, waiting for a clearance code that Callaway would now never be able to send. She sent 2 teams, with Reeves leading the primary. She stayed on calm. The warehouse operation took 47 minutes. No casualties. The cargo was secured. Weapons components, 3 categories, all matching the classified routing designations Ruiz had identified. The drivers detained. The warehouse locked and transferred to federal custody. Some of the network's outer contacts had already moved when the court authorization hit the communications facility. 3 individuals they had wanted to detain were gone before the teams reached them. That was the cost she had known was coming. Hayes' intel was good, but not complete, and the network's edges were designed to scatter when the center was hit. She stood at the comm and listened to Reeves' team confirm the cargo secured, and she let herself feel the weight of what had not been fully caught. The 3 who scattered. The parts of the network that lived in other bases, other facilities, other authorization structures they hadn't reached yet. The operation was a victory. It was not a clean one. It was necessary. It was real. And it was incomplete, the way truth in institutions is always incomplete. You close one door and find 3 more behind it. "Good work," she told Reeves through the comm. "You too, Admiral," he said. She powered down the comm and sat in the command office in the quiet dark for a long time. It broke publicly on a Thursday. Not from her office. The formal press release came through the Department of Defense's Communications Office after the federal investigation had been officially acknowledged. But the shape of it moved faster than the official channels, the way these things always do, and by Friday morning it was on every major network, and by Saturday it had been picked up internationally. 7 years of unauthorized military logistics operations. 3 bases. Weapons routing through civilian proxy networks. A deputy director of a civilian oversight body formally named as the central orchestrator. A sitting colonel suspended pending court-martial. A senior logistics officer in federal custody. Evidence assembled and presented by an embedded admiral operating under direct command authorization. The story was large. The response was larger. She watched none of it. She was still at Fort Caldwell, still behind the desk that had been Hayes, working through the documentation that a case of this scale required. Evidence packaging, chain of custody verification, personnel record reviews. The kind of work that didn't make news, but made prosecutions possible. The court-martial proceedings for Hayes were initiated on day 16. She attended the opening session as a witness. She sat in the hard chair in the formal hearing room and answered questions in the same measured, precise language she used for everything, and the evidence she had assembled answered the rest. Hayes sat across the room in his service dress and listened to the charges read in a voice that was completely flat. The commendations on his record that had been visible at eye level in his office were no longer in the room. When the session broke for the day, she passed him in the corridor without stopping. He looked at her once. She looked back. There was nothing left to say between them. Reeves came to her office on day 17. He knocked, which he hadn't done in the last week. He'd been walking in with the ease of someone who had fully inhabited the role she had given him. The fact that he knocked told her this was something personal. "Come in," she said. He sat in the chair across from her desk. He looked at his hands for a moment before he looked at her. "I've been thinking about the equipment bay," he said. "You don't need to." "I want to." He looked up. "I had the pattern in front of me earlier than I admitted to you. The operation codes. I saw something that didn't add up in the duty roster 3 weeks before I actually pulled the files. And I filed it away because it was easier to assume there was an explanation I was missing than to go looking for one." She set down what she had been reading and gave him her full attention. "I've been asking myself why," he said. "Why it was easier. And the honest answer is that the explanation I was most willing to accept was that you were the thing that didn't fit. New transfer, unclear background, seemed to know more than she should. It was easier to put the anomaly on you than to put on a system I'd been operating inside for 3 years." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the base was running its ordinary sounds. A vehicle somewhere, radio chatter at a distant frequency, the generators doing their constant work. "You're telling me this because you want me to know you understand what happened," she said. "I'm telling you because it matters that someone in this building says it plainly." He held her gaze. "I measured you against the wrong standard, and I almost let that cost something real. That's on me, not on you." She looked at him for a moment. "What you did with it when you figured it out," she said. "That's what I needed, and that's what you gave me." She picked up the document she had set down. "Don't spend too much time in the court-martial of yourself, Reeves. You're more useful to me here." He nodded once, and the thing that had been sitting between them settled. He stood, and she was already back to reading, and he left without ceremony, which was the right way to leave. Malik's commendation was processed on day 18. She had written it herself, which was not required. The citation could have gone through standard channels, but she wrote it herself because she wanted the language to be precise. What Malik had done was not dramatic. He had watched a vehicle pool in the dark for 2 hours. He had memorized plate numbers in a direction of travel and delivered them the next morning without embellishment. He had kept the information exactly where it needed to be and nowhere else. That was the work. The unglamorous, attentive, reliable work that operations ran on, and it mattered as much as anything that had happened in the courtyard on the day of the reveal. When she handed him the commendation in her office, he read it and looked up at her. "You wrote this yourself," he said. "The language in the standard form didn't cover what you actually did." He looked at it again. He was quiet for a moment in the way he was always quiet. Not uncomfortable, just deliberate. "When you first got here," he said, "your first night, walking the perimeter, I remember. I told myself it could have been anything. Couldn't sleep. Like night air. Lots of things." He folded the commendation carefully. "But I knew." "You suspected," she said. "I knew," he said again, without arrogance. "Just factually." She looked at him. "Why didn't you push harder?" "Because you didn't need me to," he said simply. "You needed me to watch and be ready. So that's what I did." She held his gaze for a moment. "That's exactly right," she said. Elena Ruiz's promotion was announced on day 19. Full captain to major, effective immediately, with a commendation from Aaliyah's office and a formal recognition of her intelligence work in the Fort Caldwell investigation. The promotion had been in process through standard channels before any of this. Ruiz's record was good enough on its own, but the commendation accelerated it and put her name into a visibility it wouldn't have reached otherwise. Ruiz received the news in her office, which she was still in the process of clearing after the investigation. The wall with the timeline was still up, every piece of it, and she had not taken it down yet because she was waiting to feel certain it was finished. She looked at the commendation for a long time. Then she started taking the wall down. Aaliyah's quiet moment came on day 20. She did not plan it. The base had been running at the altered tempo of an institution in the process of rebuilding its trust in itself. New protocols, new transparency requirements, command structure reviews, and she had been at the center of all of it, which meant she had not stopped moving in 20 days. She stopped moving on day 20. She walked to the east perimeter at 1900, after the day sessions had closed. The desert was doing what it did in the evenings, cooling fast, the sky turning from white to deep blue at the edges, the hard landscape softening slightly in the long light. She walked the same path she had walked on her first night here, past the maintenance sheds, along the back edge of the warehouse complex, to the point where the northeast corner sat outside the camera sweep. She stood there for a while. She thought about the 3 contacts who had scattered when the court authorization hit Calloway's facility. She thought about the bases they hadn't reached yet. She thought about 7 years of an operation that had been sustained by people who had convinced themselves that the integrity of their purpose canceled out the illegality of their methods. She thought about Greer's face in the gray morning light, saying, "I may have been watching it long enough that I stopped being able to tell the difference." Victory, when it came, did not feel like winning. It felt like finishing a very long and necessary walk and knowing there was another one ahead. She breathed the desert air. She stood in the camera blind spot that no one knew she had memorized on her first night. Then she walked back. The final base address was at 0800 on day 21. She had not prepared remarks. She stood at the same position in the assembly courtyard where Hayes had stood with his suspension order, and she looked out at the soldiers of Fort Caldwell. The ones who had mocked her in a mess hall, and the ones who had stayed neutral, and the ones who had watched from the back row, and the one who had sat outside his quarters with a mug of hot coffee and decided to trust something he couldn't fully explain yet. "Authority isn't given by rank," she said. "It's proven by action. Every person standing in this courtyard has had to decide, at some point in the past 21 days, what they were willing to do and what they weren't." She looked across the assembly. Those decisions matter more than any commendation or court-martial that comes out of this. Because institutions don't stay honest through structures. They stay honest through the people inside them who decide. Every time it's hard to tell the truth. The courtyard was quiet. Fort Caldwell will be reviewed, restructured, and returned to full operational status under a new command authorization. That process begins today. You will be part of it. She paused. So will the standards that were absent here. So will the accountability that was missing. She looked at them for one more moment. "Dismissed," she said. The file arrived on her desk at 1400. It came through the same secure channel that had carried her transmissions since the operation began, and it was flagged at classification level above what Fort Caldwell systems could process, which meant it had been routed manually to her personal access credentials. She opened it. It contained a logistics anomaly report from a base in a different state. Vehicle movements outside registered operations. A cargo routing code that matched 2 of the designations from Calloway's network. A pattern of access denial that an intelligence officer had noticed and flagged, and, for reasons the report did not explain, had not been able to escalate through local command channels. She read it twice. She sat back. The network she had closed at Fort Caldwell was one node. Calloway had said as much. Greer had said as much. She had known it, intellectually, since Ruiz had shown her the multi-base routing pattern on that timeline. Now, she was looking at the next one. She did not reach for the encrypted device. Not yet. She sat with the file for a moment and let the weight of it settle. Not heavily, but fully. The way you carry something when you have decided to carry it honestly. Then she stood, picked up her single bag from the corner where it had sat since day one, and walked out of the command office. The convoy was already at the main gate. She crossed the courtyard without looking back at the building. Malik was near the east wall and nodded once as she passed. She nodded back. Reeves was at the gate and opened his mouth to say something and then didn't, which was right. There was nothing that needed to be said that hadn't already been said better through the work. She got into the vehicle. The convoy pulled forward. The gate closed behind them. The base shrank in the rear window, and then the desert took it, the way the desert took everything, gradually, completely, without drama. No announcement, no spotlight, just the road ahead and the next file on the seat beside her, and the particular kind of purpose that doesn't need to be named because it already knows where it's going. If the people who tried to silence her had taken one moment to truly see her, would they have acted differently, or does power always blind itself first? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe.